The session went a little bit longer than they anticipated. So we're going to go ahead and get started. They tell us we have 45 minutes. So let me introduce myself. I'm Mac Middleton. Prior to joining the Cornerstone team, and we have two of our members here, I'll introduce them in a minute. I served for 24 years in the Maryland State Senate, 24 really enjoyable years. I had the opportunity to chair the Finance Committee the last 16 years. And after I left the General Assembly, I worked 2 years at Maryland Auto. And last year, as we were approaching, I was getting the feeling that I don't know if I wanted to continue working the job that I had. I was interested because some of my best friends were workers were at Cornerstone. So I floated the idea, and Colby Ferguson apparently heard about it. And he came to me and says, "Are you serious about maybe becoming a lobbyist?" And I said, "Well, it depends. You know, I'd have to bring some clients." He said, "We'd like to hire you." So I came to Cornerstone. My contract started the 15th of January. My first client that I brought to the team was Farm Bureau. So we're very, very proud, all of us, to represent you down in Annapolis. Let me tell you a little bit about Cornerstone. We operate in about 11 states. We also have a big national presence, work very, very closely with Congress and the executive branch there. And here in Maryland, our team started in, what was it, 2006. And the original people there were PJ Hogan, John Bohannon, and Dolores Sanchez. To my right is Bernie Sanchez. Bernie Sanchez. What do I have, Bernie Sanchez? I think faster than I talk. I was getting ready to talk about Dolores Sanchez. But anyway, Bernie joined the firm in 2018. Prior to that, his first, I guess, political experience was serving for 6 years with Bob Ehrlich when he was in Congress, and also when he came to Annapolis as the governor of the state of Maryland. After that, he worked for the Ducks Unlimited. I'm thinking Quail Unlimited, Ducks Unlimited, Turkeys, and USDA in between too. And USDA. And then after that, he went to work for Steve Hsu as his chair of his director of his government affairs. To my left is Shanetta Pascal. I worked with Shanetta very closely when I was a senator, when we were dealing with the minimum wage. She came to spend a lot of time at the Attorney General's office, worked in the O'Malley administration, and she has just joined us. She's part of our Washington team, is also part of our Maryland team. So without that, we'd like to get it started. Purpose, what we wanted to do today, is most of you know, the legislature's in session, special session. Also, because of the pandemic, we want to just give you an update on what the protocols are going to be, how things are going to be. Are they going to be different than what they were last year? Is there going to be any changes? So Bernie's going to touch on that. And after we do that, we're going to get into what we consider the big pieces of legislation that we will be involved in this year. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bernie. And I apologize, Bernie.
No need to apologize. Thanks. Good to see a lot of familiar faces from this morning. This morning, we talked a lot about elections and politics. And today we're going to talk about something that has nothing to do with politics at all, redistricting, which is going on right now in Annapolis and will be going on in January. I want to first just update you, as Max said, for those of you who roam the halls of Annapolis, either for the Farm Bureau or another organization, or in your free time, you know that things changed dramatically last year due to COVID. The House and Senate leadership have announced the policies again this year for the legislative session, which obviously can change between now and January 11th. But the policies as of right now is that it will be a very similar setup to last year, where all of the committee hearings will be virtual hearings again. So it's very important for the folks who, obviously like you, who advocate on different issues before those committees. They will not be in the committee rooms. They will be in their offices or wherever they may be, and having virtual testimony as they did last year. The big difference this year is that the buildings themselves will be open, so you will be able to go in to meet with legislators. I know the Senate has a restriction of 4 people in an office at a time outside of their staff. But this is a big difference, which should be a very positive difference, I think, where we're able to now be in the halls and have those more casual conversations with the legislators as they go across the street over to the chambers. They will be voting in person again, as they did last year in the full House and Senate chambers, which obviously has to be expected as to where they would do that. The public will be allowed into the galleries this year, which was not allowed last year in the House and Senate chambers. If anyone has a desire to go over and watch the procedures as they go through and vote. And the committee voting sessions will be live streamed. This, for a lobbyist or for those who deal with the legislature every day, this was probably one of the biggest positives that came out of COVID. In Annapolis, not all chairmen are as open as Mac was as the Senate Finance Chairman. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, oftentimes committee hearings are always open to the public. Public comes in and testifies. They get to the voting sessions, they close the doors. And when a lobbyist or someone else walks into those closed doors, you get the dirtiest looks by the chairman because they don't want you in that room while they're voting. Last year, they started live streaming all of the voting sessions, which was never done before. So it's actually hugely helpful. Subcommittee of voting sessions live stream. So that is going to happen again this year, which is great. And so to Mac's credit, Mac used to always have the doors wide open. People were always welcome coming in and out while he was the chair of finance, which was sorely missed as we lost him as the chair there. But that is kind of the kind of formalities for session. And one last thing, which I know does affect the Farm Bureau as you do events every year, there will not be large events in the House or Senate buildings. So, often organizations will have dinners or days in Annapolis where they'll have a reception or something like that at night. And there will also not be any committee dinners where committees can be invited to dinner. So those are the policies from last year that will remain in place. But it will be a little bit more open, and I can't imagine things becoming more relaxed just due to COVID obviously not going away anytime soon. So that's the way things will be for this year. And I'm going to actually pause right there. If there are any questions on the procedures or anything going on in the halls, and then we'll get into both redistricting and then big issues for session. So any questions there? Yes. Actually, I ask you to use a microphone so people who are listening can hear the questions.
So thank you for that information. So it sounds like on-campus events are canceled for the year. How about off-campus events at some of the local watering holes or other establishments?
Sure. So to the best of our knowledge, the direction that we've been given from House leadership is that there will not be any committee dinners. So for those of you who don't know, committee dinners, the Farm Bureau may want to host a dinner for the Environment and Transportation Committee where you go to a local restaurant, the members come in for a dinner, you sit down, very casual, off the record conversations, but at the same time, you get to push an issue that you're trying to push or try to fight an issue you're trying to fight. Those will not be happening this year. Last year, legislators were out and about a decent amount, especially as session wore on at the local restaurants and bars. From everything that we know, there will not be any formal events. So no, big dinners or big kind of events that are happening, but there are rallies that are going to be happening on Lawyers Mall, other events like that. Does that answer your question? Yeah. We've been told no committee dinners, and presumably the committees won't schedule committee dinners because they've been told no committee dinners, but that's where things are. Anything else? Okay. I have up on the screen, Colby asked us to include some of the maps that are currently being discussed. It's a little bit hard to see for those in the back of the room. I'm going to stand over here so I can point as I talk. Today, the General Assembly convened for a special session to deal with congressional redistricting. So we talked about this for those in the room this morning. The House and Senate committees met jointly today to hear both the governor's, let me get the name correct, Citizens advisory committee, a citizen advisory committee, and then there's a legislative committee that came up with different maps. So the map you see here is the current map for all the congressional districts that passed 10 years ago. The legislative committee came up with their own map, and the governor came up with his map. And about half an hour ago, 20 minutes ago, the legislative committee, shockingly, passed its legislative map. Not to be a surprise to anyone. I say that kind of jokingly because everyone really expected what to happen. So this is the map that the governor put into place. The governor has been harping for 7 years about the gerrymandered map of Maryland. He came out with his recommendation, or his committee came out with a recommendation, which he would argue is much more compact, much more simplified. And actually, some people on both sides did not like this map because of the way it would change some of the districts, including the Western Maryland district. Some people had asked for him to be kind of more partisan with his map. But that map was not voted on today. And this is the map that was put forward by the Legislative Redistricting Committee that met throughout the state. You'll see it's really hard to compare both of them because there's 8 districts, obviously. The one that's received the most attention is the 1st Congressional District, where we are. Obviously, we're down here in Cambridge. And this is Congressman Andy Harris's district, the one Republican of the 8 congressional seats. And the big controversy has been from the Republican side that they brought this district back across the bridge into areas of Anne Arundel County. For those of you who have been in Maryland for a long time, you'll know the 1st Congressional District used to come around to Southern Maryland. Most recently, it had parts of Hartford and Carroll County across the northern part of the state. So this map has now been passed by the legislative committees. I believe from a timing standpoint, it will go to the floors in both chambers tonight. Actually, it's going to probably go tomorrow morning to both of the chambers that will pass this bill. The governor has said he will veto the bill. It will then come back. They will override the veto of the bill. So this special session is scheduled to last this week. One of the inside kind of baseball items is that when the governor has presented a bill while the General Assembly is in session, he has a week to act on that bill. So there's potential this could go into next week, but it's very unlikely. He will likely veto the bill quickly, send it back down to the General Assembly, who will override that veto. The session started today in the Senate, where they actually overrode vetoes from last January. So General Assembly passes bills January, February, March. They adjourn in April. The Constitution says that when the governor vetoes the bill, the General Assembly has to take up those vetoes the next time they meet, which was today. So they have overridden, the Senate has overridden a bunch of those vetoes. I think there was 9 today. And I believe the House is going to go in at 6 o'clock tonight to override some of the bills as well. They'll continue to do this work. So this session is about the congressional maps. It's about the veto overrides from last session. And also, as we discussed this morning, Delora highlighted, they will elect a new state treasurer. Nancy Kopp has been the state treasurer. She is retiring. They will, excuse me, they are expected to elect Delegate Derek Davis from Prince George's County to be the new treasurer. That will be the last item of business, as Delora mentioned this morning in our discussions. This map here is the current state legislative districts. So we talked about a congressional districts. Again, it's a little bit challenging to see from that far away, but those of you who are from around the state, Garrett County 1A, all the way across to Worcester County for the legislative districts, and then the areas on the inset around the DC suburbs and around Baltimore City. This is the current map. When the legislature comes back in January, they will be redrawing the state legislative districts for the state House of Delegates and for the Senate. So I had a name wrong. The Maryland Citizens Redistricting Commission. This is the governor's commission that he put into place. were his proposed new map for the state districts. We have not yet seen a proposed map out of the legislative committee for these districts. The one thing that's actually interesting for those of you who care about things like this map renumbers the districts so that it goes from west to east, 1 through 47. So if this were to go into effect, steal the punchline, it won't go into effect. If this were to go into effect, a lot of people would have different numbered districts when the General Assembly reconvenes. So I will leave this last slide up as we talk about our team later on. I want to make sure that I covered all of the topics regarding redistricting. I did. Okay. Before I turn it to Shanetta, just talk quickly about other big issues that will be coming in the General Assembly session. I guess 18 months ago, Comptroller Francho talked about how the impact of COVID could create about $6 billion deficit for Maryland. Maryland coming into the January legislative session is expected to have a $4 billion surplus. So fortunes have changed dramatically where the state was really bracing for a huge impact. And now the state is flush with cash in a very unique position that in my lifetime, in my 20 years, I've never seen where the state is in such great financial shape. So that will be issue number one. The budget is always issue number one. The General Assembly passes the budget every year, obviously, and how that surplus and how that financial situation plays out will be one of the most pressing issues. Obviously, with it being an election year, a lot of themes will be geared toward election policy issues that are coming up for those in the General Assembly. The governor will likely propose tax cuts to offset some of these extra dollars in the coffers. Unlikely the General Assembly will support those. They'll come up with some of their own ideas that I know Shanetta is going to touch on as well. Governors also recently talked, you've heard, I'm sure in the news, about asking the General Assembly to pass crime legislation. There's bills last year dealing with peace reform and crime issues. We expect those bills to be introduced again this year by the governor to deal with some of the issues that Baltimore City has been facing over the last year. So I am going to pause there, and I know Colby is touching on some of the issues specific to ag, oh, actually, I'll give you one more. Marijuana, we expect legislation to, this will be obviously a huge news item as states, more and more states legalize adult use or recreational use of marijuana. Maryland now has medical use, and we expect this will be an interesting kind of inside battle. The president of the Senate has pushed that they legalize marijuana this year and just have it go into effect. The Speaker of the House has said she would only support if it was a referendum. So it'll go to the ballot next November for the voters to decide. So it's expected that this will go into effect. Whether it goes into effect, the public polls have showed wide support for this in Maryland, but this will be a high profile issue as this moves forward through the state. So I will pause there and happy to answer questions, but I'll turn it over to Shanetta to roll us through some of the other issues that we expect. Oh, sorry. Sure.
My name's Kate Gardner, and I'm from Montgomery County. So I know the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee has been speculating that District 14 may likely be a shared district with Howard County in the redistricting. Do you have any information on that, of if there's one map that's looking to favor that, or if that's something that's been moved away from her? Any information about that, just because it would impact how we lobby in that area?
I have not seen any maps yet that, other than the governor's or the commission that has put out its maps. I have not seen any maps from General Assembly leadership for the state districts. I know this week they're obviously focused on the congressional districts, and I have not heard any specifics regarding District 14. So.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First, before I go into my spiel, were there any more questions about what Bernie stated? Are you aware?
The question was, are there any of the bills that the General Assembly is now overriding related to agricultural issues? And the short answer is no. Obviously, there's one energy bill that is expected to be overridden, but nothing too specific to ag. Some of the bills today were dealing with local taxing authority. Another one was dealing with COVID. There were 9 of them. I can't think of them all off the top of my head, but nothing specific to ag.
And just to go along with that, some of the ones that I know they're aware of, in addition to Bernie said, they're dealing with a bill to remove the governor's process involved in the parole process. They have a couple of immigration related bills that they're going to veto. And another big one is the bill to expand collective bargaining for the state's community colleges employees. So those are the ones that we're hearing that they're supposed to do this week. At one point, there was a talk up to 40, but I don't think there'll be that many bills that they'll veto override this week. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're expecting as some of the major legislation that's going to come through in the 2022 legislative session. As Bernie mentioned, Maryland is in a unique and enviable position in that they have a surplus that no one expected. So that means there'll be a lot of bills in to spend that money because that's what legislators do. In particular, you're going to see a lot of, I think, legislation that builds on what's been happening on the federal level. For Cornerstone, I actually do both federal and state lobbying and have been, we have a lot of clients who've been involved on the federal level with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So one of the things we expect to see in Maryland is some of that transportation and infrastructure money being decided how to use not only in the budget process, but also in legislation that many folks will be put in. So you will see things in regards to highways, public transportation, transit. We're expecting to see legislation on how to spend the broadband money, as there have been bills in before. But one of the things that people are pushing in Maryland in regards to broadband, for example, is making it easier to connect communities by using the infrastructure and the broadband money to make public access points for a broadband, like your public libraries, your schools, government buildings, et cetera. So people, even if they don't have that connectivity at home, they have a place close to them, particularly in urban and rural areas of the state where they can get broadband. This was one of those things that what we knew about, and we knew that it was out there, but COVID highlighted that we have a lot of communities in the state of Maryland that do not have broadband access. So expect to see legislation to sort of accelerate the use of those funds and to get broadband access to everyone in the state. Other legislation that we'll see that we think that there was a big climate change bill that was in last year that stalled in the last few days of session. So we're expecting that to be brought back by Senator Penske and Delegate Barve. They've both recently stated that they plan to try to work out some of their differences and not let it play out at the end of the session like they did last year. That bill includes cuts to increase cuts in greenhouse gas emission goals, boost in electric vehicle charging stations, increase green building standards, and an emphasis on environmental justice, just to name a few things that we believe will be in there. Other talk that we've heard that was a bill in last year that may be put into this is creating basically a czar for all of Maryland's climate change efforts, so it can be coordinated in one person or one office. So we will be looking for that legislation. Another thing that we mentioned, Bernie mentioned the cannabis bill that will likely be in. It's just a matter of which form will come out. The speaker has said she would like for it to go to referendum, but we do know that a lot of advocates are pushing for her to change her mind and join Senator Ferguson and just pushing it out as legalization in next year, 2022. So that's something to watch as well. Another big item that will likely happen in 2022 is the minimum wage bill. As mentioned, Delegate Davis, former chairman, well, chairman right now, because I haven't voted yet, Chairman Delegate Davis of Economic Matters, is a big supporter of the minimum wage bill. And one of his priorities he had said this year was going to be to accelerate it. As some of you may know, Maryland's passed the minimum wage bill. It was indexed to be fully at $15 an hour by 2025, I believe. And so there have been talks about accelerating that and getting that to $15 an hour at a critical level. We expect that someone else will take up the mantle once that Chairman Davis becomes treasurer of Maryland. Don't know yet who. There's several talks on this committee. We have a few people who might be the newly speculated chair of Economic Matters. But we're waiting to see, but we believe that will be a big bill and a big battle as well. I'll pause for a minute because I know I just said a lot of information to see if anyone has any questions on those things that I mentioned. Don't see any questions, so I'll keep going. There are a couple other things that we expect to see. And again, it's relation to how much money Maryland will have and issues that are top of priority for Maryland. Education, as you all know, is always a priority for Maryland and for the General Assembly. And, you know, they dealt with Curran 2.0. We're going to see a lot of advocates and some jurisdictions, particularly probably Prince George's County and Baltimore City, pushing to use some of this surplus money to implement Curran and to help them in particular implement Curran. So we expect that to be a conversation and a battle. There also may be legislation to deal with childcare. As you know, as you may be aware of, on the federal level, childcare funding was basically cut out of the federal bill, the Build Back Better bill. So you may see some Maryland legislators try to do something on the state level to deal with that and implement some type of assistance here for lower moderate income families. In addition, there's probably going to be something sort of the same lines, looking at, again, housing assistance. During the COVID period, there have been a lot of emergency measures, both on the federal and state level, to deal with the housing crisis and to help with people who were, for a variety of reasons, unable to keep up with their rental or mortgage payments. So we expect to see some legislation to continue to use those unused funds from the federal level, but also to push out quicker how you can get out that rental assistance to many in the state of Maryland. Lastly, I think the one thing that Bernie had mentioned, how police reform is something that the governor will be pushing. He has 2 bills that he mentioned that he hoped that they would look at this special session. They're likely not to bring them up. However, he will probably introduce his police reform bills, and we expect to see even more police reform and gun bills coming in. Chairman Smith, thank you, has mentioned that he has some tweaks to the police reform bills that passed last year, and that one of the ones he's going to be pushing is he wants to end the automatic charging of juveniles in adult court for certain crimes. That was something that he was involved in the past, but he wants to support it more full-heartedly this year. And outgoing Attorney General Brian Frosh has also said he would be on board for pushing for that efforts. So we do expect to see a lot of criminal justice and police reform bills coming up in 2022. So those are some of the highlights. But if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Yeah, you can. Okay, climate change bill that you mentioned. Thank you very much. I'm not familiar with what was in that bill last year. You said it stalled. Is there anything related to agriculture specifically in that bill?
There's a provision for tree planting. That was a big thing. Senator Penske's bill.
Thank you.
Plant 5 million trees. It's been a concern with some of the agriculture community. Where are you going to plant all those trees? So that was part of it. That's the only part I think that was there that wasn't mentioned, that Shanetta mentioned.
Not treat juveniles as adults?
For certain crimes. Yeah, so in Maryland, and there are serious felony crimes. I can't think of a list off the top of my head. There are probably like 7 or 9 of them. But it's what you would think of, you know, first-degree murder, certain sexual crimes of rape and things like that, that in Maryland, a juvenile is automatically put into adult court. They can petition to be removed back to family court, but the decision on the is basically automatically to put them in adult court. So what Chairman Smith and others are pushing is that the opposite would happen, that they would automatically start procedures in family court, and then that the state's attorney prosecutor can put in a motion to move them to adult court. So it wouldn't disallow that to happen. It would just change the process and the way it starts off. And that's for, again, certain felonies. And again, I think it's 7 or 9 class felonies that it applies to. And so it's generally your more serious charges. Other questions, comments, thoughts? I know we're keeping you from the reception, so maybe that's why.
Maybe they have a question of a particular piece of legislation we haven't.
Yeah, if there are questions about other legislation we haven't mentioned or about the session in general in 2022, please go ahead.
I have a question I've been thinking about all day, and I feel very ignorant in asking it. What does the treasurer do? Do we care who the treasurer is?
Yes, we do. I'll give my 2 cents and I'll pass it to Bernie and Mike, Bernie and Mac. But you do care. One of the big responsibilities they're one of the 3 members on the Board of Public Works. As you know, in Maryland, most large procurement contracts have to go and be approved by the Board of Public Works. The other 2 members are the governor and the comptroller's office. So anytime your tax dollars are being spent in large numbers, the treasurer is one of the 3 votes.
Another very important function of the treasurer is all the money coming into the state. The treasurer decides how that's going to be invested. So it's very, very important. Now, you may have asked what the controller does, because over the years, and it's a lot doing with the Democrat legislature and the conflict that they were in with the current controller and running for governor, the conflict that they had, a lot of the powers of the controller were stripped from them. So. Okay. Any interest in any other legislation? Okay. Poultry.
As I'm gonna walk and give you the microphone, I wanted to reiterate for those who weren't in the room this year, some major changes this year in committee leadership in the House of Delegates. As we talked about, Chairman Derek Davis has been the longtime chair of Economic Matters Committee, and he is going to be voted this week to be treasurer. We expect C.T. Wilson, who's a delegate from Charles County, to replace him as the chair. It's also been announced that the Ways and Means Committee Chairwoman Ann Kaiser has stepped down from chairwoman of that committee, and Vanessa Atterbury from Howard County will be coming in to be the chair as session convenes. So 2 major changes in the committee. There's also other positions that were highlighted this morning as far as vice chair and some staffing changes, but unusual to have that many changes going into the final year of a term. So wanted to make sure we highlighted that.
Bernie, do you want to mention particularly in the House the 2 chairs who are retiring?
Oh, yes. And also next year, Maggie McIntosh, longtime chair, actually a pretty good friend of agriculture as well. She used to be the chair of the environment. It used to be Environmental Matters Committee. She's the chair of appropriations, has announced she's not running again for re-election. Shane Pendergrass, who has been the chair of the Health and Government Operations Committee, which also has ag issues that go before it as well. She will not be running again. So there'll be 2 new chairs when the General Assembly comes back a year from now. So 4 of the 6 standing committees in the House having turnover will be a lot of change in that. So Senate side, would you guys like to talk on the Senate side? One person we talked about this morning, Will Smith, is the chair of Judicial Proceedings Committee. We do expect him to stay, but he's potentially going to run for Attorney General. So if he were to run for Attorney General, he would step down from his position, and that could be a new chair of Judicial Proceedings Committee. Dolores Kelly is rumored to not be running again. We haven't heard any confirmation of that, but she is the current chair of the Senate Finance Committee that Mac used to chair. So that would be a major change for that committee. And Budget and Tax, Guy Gazone is running again. He's the current chairman there. And I am missing Paul Pinsky. Oh, we talked about Paul as well this morning. Senator Pinsky he was rumored to not be running, but he is running again for re-election. He's the chair of the Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. A little bit less friendly to the agriculture community, but we expect him to be back as chairman next year if he was to win his re-election. So anything else? All right.
Holly Porter, Delmarva Chicken Association. So one potential bill and one, I guess more, you touched on it briefly with the climate change, but environmental justice, that has been a discussion. Of course, there's a commission and just what you might be hearing on, I guess, maybe giving that commission a bit more power, teeth, however the term might be or used, and also environmental rights, the environmental rights amendment, I believe, the constitutional amendment that I have heard in several circles, I believe will be coming back again this year. Just curious.
Sure. I forgot to mention actually the constitutional amendment. Thank you, Holly, for that. There is a constitutional amendment that was put in, actually it's been put in for several years. And it is expected to be back again this year. As far as what the specifics are, we don't know. It could be a major concern for the ag community because it could bring the right for individuals to sue whomever they determine is responsible for an environmental issue or for a health issue. So look around this room. Exactly. So that bill will be back this year. The proponents have talked about it, and there's an article recently about it. As far as what the details are of that bill is to be determined. If that is to move forward, the Farm Bureau will be very much involved in that legislation as it moves forward. Hopefully the other departments as well will be involved in it. Environmental justice, you want to?
Basically what I'm hearing, what we've been hearing about environmental justice, a lot of it probably will likely be included in the climate change bill, but they are definitely, advocates are pushing for, as you mentioned, sort of more teeth and more enforcement actions. In particular, Delegate Stephanie Smith out of Baltimore City and Senator Jill Carter are both very active in this and are looking at ways that environmental racism has affected urban areas, in particular Baltimore City. So you'll see a lot of emphasis on lead pipe, clean water. I'm trying to think of the last name. Delegate Smith was talking about trees and I can't think of the term right now, so I apologize. Yeah. And so I definitely think you will see from both legislators and advocates that there will be in a large sort of portfolio or part of the climate change bill when it comes to environmental justice.
Yeah, one piece of legislation that we beat down last year we're hoping that it would die would be the ban on Roundup, but we're expecting that bill will come back again this year. We don't know what form it's going to be in. We don't know who the sponsor is, but we're bracing for it. So I see Julie and I see Hans here. One other issue that we've been working on is an assessment, vulnerability assessment on agriculture because of climate change. We see a lot of the areas of the state that are already affected when you look at the saltwater intrusion and others. So the Hughes Center, which I serve on, worked very collaboratively with the Department of Agriculture and the Department of the Environment to develop the framework of how a study would occur and who were the stakeholders going to be, what the scope of the study was going to be, and what the anticipated funding was going to be. We have a report, a draft report that we're going to be presenting to the governor, to the legislature. We met this past week with Secretary Brinkley to discuss the governor perhaps taking this as an executive position. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get funding. We're anticipating that the study will take 2 years, but what is foremost on our mind is two things. Number one, we did not want any funding to be taken from either of the departments, because if you look and having served in the legislature, there are more years that I served there where there was a structural deficit in the budget. And every time there was a structural deficit, budgets got cut. And it seemed like the Department of Environment, Department of Agriculture got a lot of those cuts. And they're bare bones. So we did not want this study to take funding from either of those two state departments. So we're hopeful that it will be done. And the other central piece of it is that if you're going to come up with a study and a recommendation, you have to include the farming community. They've got to be the guiding forces. It's senseless of us trying to figure out what the farmers want and working from top down rather than bottom up. So, and that's another reason why we wanted it as a two-year undertaking, knowing that farmers are very, very busy. They have a window of where they have an opportunity, like right now when you're having a conference, when they're not out there planting, taking care of and harvesting their crops. So we're hopeful that that will move ahead. So.
Sure. I guess I'll wrap up. It's quarter of. Briefly, I just wanted to touch, I put this last slide up here. This is our whole Maryland team for Cornerstone Government Affairs. We really pride ourselves in that when we work with a client such as the Farm Bureau, who's been a client with us, that we take a team approach, that we all are involved in a lot of these issues. So obviously you heard from Shanetta and Mac and myself, and those who were here earlier, you heard from Dolores Sanchez of Icalche earlier this morning, but we have Southern Maryland very well represented. For those of you from Southern Maryland, John Bohannon, former delegate from St. Mary's County, longtime aide to Congressman Steny Hoyer, Van Mitchell, former delegate from Charles County as well, former Secretary of Health, PJ Hogan, former senator from Montgomery County, longtime employee at the University System of Maryland. After that, Jenna Masoni came from Johns Hopkins 2 years ago to Cornerstone. And last but certainly not least, Ellen Valentino. Those of you who are in Annapolis know Ellen's been a longtime business lobbyist. Used to work with National Federation of Independent Businesses, but currently involved with MAP, to Mid-Atlantic Petroleum Dealers, which gas stations, and we actually deal with a lot of issues and overlap between ag issues and fuel issues. So that's our team. So if you know any of those folks, please feel free to reach out to any of them or any of us at any point. But it's been a great talk with you all today, and awesome to represent the Farm Bureau. So thank you.